Yeah, my name's Ben, and I work on the research policy team at HEFCE. We're the largest single funder of research in the UK. We distribute roughly £1.6 billion in research funding per year to universities in England. That's allocated directly to universities, not to individual researchers. So the researchers among you may feel that you've got no stake in this really, because you don't get any money, but you do. And if it wasn't for us, you'd have to double your teaching hours. So you can thank me later. The money you get is allocated as on the back of the results of the REF. Sorry about that. We've just finished the REF. The results are out, and we're now thinking about the next REF. I suppose the only concrete thing that we've decided about the next REF is that it will be an open access REF. So I'm going to talk about our open access policy, which we announced last year, which I was kind of responsible for writing, but it was a bit of a team effort. But I'll come on to that. So a bit of background, then, about open access very briefly. I think to look at open access, you kind of have to go back 350 years, really, which I'll try and do very quickly. And going back to the first journal, which was the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. And if you reflect on that, then you realise that actually the world hasn't really changed that much in 350 years in journal publishing. Only two things have changed, actually. The first is that we no longer have Dear Sir on the top of our journal articles. And the second is that we now publish electronically instead of in print. And that electronic sharing of documents, of publishing, creates the opportunity for open access. So open access appeared roughly 20 years ago when a chap called Stephen Harnad in the University of Southampton had a subversive proposal, and he said this is a complete waste of time publishing all these articles in these print journals. Costs a fortune. We're now in a digital age. We have anonymous FTP servers with web servers where we can put our documents, which we've written ourselves, not on typewriters, but we've done them on the computers. We can put these computer-generated documents on the web for people to read, and we can bypass the old wasteful publishing industry, and it can be done in a matter of 2 years. We can get to the point where there are no more journals and we're doing it all on the web. Well, that was 20 years ago, and I think it's fair to say that that hasn't happened really, that we still have journals, and there are very good reasons why we still have journals. So I think we haven't quite moved to the world of full open access. So alongside that, other things have happened too. The amount of money that universities, libraries are spending on subscribing to journals has increased dramatically in the last 2 years. The big deals that libraries sign with large commercial publishers go up by above inflation percentage point rises each year, and that's an unsustainable picture. No university can afford to subscribe to all of the scholarly literature out there. Even Harvard, for instance, complain that they can't get access to all the journals that they need. And some journals have frighteningly high subscription prices. A journal, Tetrahedron, which is an Elsevier journal, for your libraries to subscribe to that for 1 year is £14,000. That's a lot of money, isn't it? And that's just one journal. So if you think about the figure's debatable, but if you think there's about 20,000 journals out there, then it's quite scary, the amount of money which is being spent on this stuff, and it continues to go up. So there's a bit of a serials crisis out there. So in the UK we've started to move towards an open access vision, and the big catalyst for that was our former Universities and Science Minister David Willetts, who before he became Minister for Universities and Science was writing a non-fiction book called The Pinch, and was, like many of us, getting very frustrated at trying to access the scientific and scholarly literature that he needed to base his book was based on, but kept coming up against paywalls. Pay £35 to access this article, pay £29.99 to access this article, time and again, and thought, this has got to stop, I've got to sort this out. So then he got elected and put in the cabinet and was given responsibility for universities, and decided that he would ask his friend Janet Finch to help sort it out. So, that report came out, gosh, it's nearly 3 years ago now, isn't it, Ian? Yeah. And that recommended that we needed to move to an open access publishing environment in the UK for university research. I think this is a position that we welcome. And the policies have now been introduced by the various research funders. We are instructed to introduce policies so that the research that we fund should be open access. And the research councils were first, and they introduced a policy that said that you must publish via open access, via the gold open access route, and if there's no option for that, then go green. And they put money up to pay for the article processing charges to make things available open access. Now, we've had a couple of years of that, and last year we introduced our own policy, which I'll talk about. The first, why? Why open access? And I think there are 4 reasons why we care about this. I've put them up there. The first is the efficiency argument, which is to say that, if we're spending all this money on subscriptions just to access the scholarly literature which we've written ourselves as universities and that we've peer-reviewed for free, then clearly there's a huge inefficiency there. And that some people see open access as the way that we can drive down the costs of scholarly communication and deal with the serials crisis and try and kind of put pressure on and take a lot of money out of the system, which they see as being wasted in the current arrangements. The second argument is a kind of utility argument. Research is more useful if it's accessed. If you write your research and you publish it in a journal that people at Harvard can't access, or people in other universities around the world, and that's a shrinking pool of people that can actually afford to access your work, how useful is that? It's not useful to the research process, and it's certainly not useful to everybody else who's outside of a university, people like me, who I need to rely on access to journals to do my job effectively, and it costs a hell of a lot of money. So a lot of the time I don't bother to access this stuff. The research isn't as useful. And I would say it's not as good, actually. That no one would disagree with me if I said that if you went into your lab and you did some research and you wrote up the results and then you printed off the results as a paper and put the paper straight in the bin, that you were doing effective research. I think that having your research effectively shared is a key part of that. So sharing more widely means you're doing better research. But actually the most compelling one for me is the 4th reason. As a public funder for research, putting out £1.6 billion a year of public money into universities to do research, I think we have a moral responsibility to make sure that that research is shared as effectively as possible to make the biggest difference. And that's not happening at the moment. It's not acceptable for people like me to pay my taxes as a taxpayer and to manage the allocation of public money at that scale and for it not to be used to the best possible effect. I think there's a strong moral reason for wanting to do this. But we are operating in a world where getting towards open access is going to be difficult. So I'll depress you a bit by talking about some of the constraints. In the gold world, well, that's very obvious, isn't it? It costs money. It costs a lot of money to move towards gold open access. It would cost the UK £265 million a year to pay for all of the article processing charges for making all of the UK's research open access. That's money we don't have. That's a hell of a lot of money out of the NHS, or it's every university sucking 10% of its researchers in order to fund article processing charges for the other 90%. Now that's a very tough choice, actually, and it puts a real constraint on our ability to move towards a fully gold open access. As long as publishers don't bring down their subscription prices when they just take more money for making things open access. So that's a big issue. On the other side, on the green side, publishers do allow academics to put their work, to self-archive, to put their work in repositories, to put it on personal websites. 96% of the journal articles submitted to the last ref were published in journals where they were allowed to do this. They were allowed to put their work on a repository with but there are actually restrictions, and there are 3 main restrictions and main issues with this green open access route. The first is that you can't put it on straight away, that they make you wait a year or 2 or 3 or 4. The second is that they continue to own the copyright, so the other people are prevented from doing interesting things with your research. The intellectual property is controlled by the publisher still, and it's not in the Creative Commons. And the third restriction is that you're not allowed to put your published version, your typeset, beautiful PDFs. You have to do it with your accepted manuscripts, your kind of peer-reviewed Word documents, if you like. Now those are the constraints that we're working within, and those are the constraints that guided our policy. So our policy is, well, you have this 96% of places that let you do this, so do it. So our policy is very simple. Deposit your manuscript. Do it as soon as it's accepted for publication, put it in the institution repository or in a subject repository, and then it will become available as soon as it can. And that will be a publisher choice about how long the embargo period is. You know, we want the embargo periods to be as short as possible. We think a year for the sciences and 2 years for the humanities and social sciences is about right. That gets us to 96%. For the areas where you can't do it because the publisher stops you from doing it, or there might be other very legal or technical reasons why you can't do this, there are some exceptions. So quite simple, really. Get your papers in the repository. So I think there are some benefits to this. And in my mind, the main benefit is that it puts the authors back in control of delivering open access to their work. It engages the authors in the process of doing this. I think without that, without authors feeling that they have some responsibility for delivering open access and for caring about how their research is communicated, we might have another 350 years of the system remaining exactly the same, and people's research not being read and not being used. I think the other benefit is that there's obviously a huge scope here, with the vast majority of research papers being published in places that allow people to do this self-archiving. So there's obviously a huge benefit in setting up a policy that kind of respects those constraints. It's cheaper. It's cheaper than paying £265 million a year. And the infrastructure exists already. You have a university repository here. Pretty much every university has a repository. There are lots of subject repositories out there which are being used, like the Physics Archive and the SSRN for social sciences. Let's use them. Let's take the opportunity that we have for people to engage and to deliver open access. So I've made it sound very easy, but there are some challenges. I think there are three. I think the first challenge is a policy challenge, actually. But, I think that the policy that we've put out there, which is just deposit your work, get it in the repository, is very simple. But it's not the same open access policy which the research councils have introduced, where they make money available for paying article processing charges. There's a lot of complexity there. It's not exactly the same policy as the European funders. And all the different funders in the world are introducing their own policies for open access and their own ways of doing things. And all the publishers have their own ways of delivering open access and their own terms and conditions for green open access, their own options for gold open access. And it's a very complicated policy landscape. So I think a real challenge is trying to understand that and then trying to simplify it. The second challenge is cultural. I don't think it's unfair to say that people, generally the vast majority of researchers, don't really care that much about open access. And if they agree with it, then they just don't have the time to engage with this stuff. Hopefully, making it a condition of the ref will help change that, and will achieve some cultural change, so that people can feel that they're doing this because they have to, and maybe that's what we need. Is we need people to feel compelled to do this, and maybe that's a positive thing. Maybe people will start to move towards feeling more positive about engaging with this agenda. I think there are some difficulties around there, but there's certainly a substantial cultural challenge from moving beyond the current position, which is one where people just publish in the top journals and don't really care about any of these issues at all. And then the third issue is a technological issue. Now, repositories are great, and I'm sure the University of Sussex repository is wonderful, but the vast majority of repositories that I've seen in universities are very clunky. We've had 20 years of Stephen Harnad's subversive proposal, and sometimes it feels like we haven't had 20 years of development of repository systems. And anyone who's ever uploaded a photo to Facebook, or a video to YouTube, or an audio file to SoundCloud, or a paper to ResearchGate, or any of those things nowadays, it's dead easy. You just do it, and there are very few things that can go wrong with it, and it guides you through it. And I don't think we're at that point yet for repositories where people can find it really easy to engage and this is just simple, and it happens. Some research that research consulting did said that it takes on average 45 minutes for people to upload a paper to a repository, which is absolutely incredible, really, when you think how long it takes you to put a photo on Facebook. So those are the ones that we have to deal with. We've got to try and deal with those policy challenges and the cultural challenges and the technical challenges, and those are, that's a joint responsibility, really, for everybody in this room. But I think there are probably some longer-term challenges here as well. I think we've got to try and move towards a situation where this is easy and automatic for people. If we can engage people, fantastic. If we can compel people to do this, then that's even better. But if we can get to the point where they really have no choice because it happens automatically and people don't have to worry about this stuff, then I think that's the ideal situation. We have to sort out the issue of double dipping. We've got to sort out the publishers kind of taking more money for open access stuff while continuing to charge the UK increasing amounts to subscriptions. That's a major barrier to the UK moving towards gold open access. It's the fact that it's going to cost a fortune and universities are going to have to sack 10% of their staff. That to me makes it. We're at an impasse there. We have to try and solve that issue if we're going to move towards open access publishing and away from accepted manuscripts after an embargo. There's also, the copyright issues are quite big here as well. Now, to my mind, the most important bit of open access is getting people to read the papers and have access to them so that they can make immediate use of the information that's contained within them. But there are lots of reasons why the open bit of open access is just as important, in that it enables people to reuse the text and the information in the papers in new and creative ways. Now, some of that is slightly pie in the sky, perhaps, about people doing interesting mashups and data mining and stuff like that, that perhaps for some disciplines doesn't really feel like it's an immediate benefit, and there's definitely something that's further down the road. But there are some quite real things that we are lacking the ability to do legally at the moment under copyright or rights reserved, such as people being able to take lengthy extracts from books and papers, combine them together as a single file, and then give them out to their students as course material. I'm sure lots of people do that already, lecturers, but they're not allowed to actually. It's against the law. So, that's a very easy, relatable benefit of open access, of the open bit of open access, which has been prevented by the current copyright situation, and we need to move beyond that. So the Creative Commons licenses and things, I think, are going to become more normally used, and we have to get to a point where they're more accepted, and that we find a way of getting them more kind of normal in the kind of academic life and in publishing. But there's also, I think, another issue here is that we're only really at the moment talking about journals, perhaps conference papers. But what about books? Don't they have potential to be open access as well? What about data sets? What about software? What about creative works, artistic works, and practice-based research? Doesn't this stuff also, if we're really serious about the arguments for open access, why constrain it to just one part of scholarly output? Why not say that all of the outputs of research should be open access? Well, let's have a look, shall we? So monographs. Well, they're kind of like journal articles, aren't they? They're just longer journal articles. So why can't books be open access? And well, we suggested it in our policy, in our consultation. But we are told very clearly, no. The world is not ready for a move towards open access for monographs. Monographs are special, and the people that write monographs are special. So we need to not go there. And we thought, well, why? Actually, what makes monographs special? What makes them different? So we did some research, and Jeff Crossick, who was formerly Warden of Goldsmiths and Vice Chancellor of the University of London, did some research into this issue to find out, well, what makes monographs special, actually? Why are they so important? And if they are different, then what are the challenges? What are the special challenges for moving towards open access? And that report came out last month, I think, or a couple of months ago. I've just got some of the things here. Now, these aren't actually Jeff. This isn't a table that Jeff put together. This is my interpretation, but it's just to illustrate some of the major differences between journal articles and books. Journal articles, we have digital publishing. It's normal. Books, digital publishing is quite abnormal, actually. I think a lot of books are still published as print books. Now, clearly that makes moving towards open access trickier. Journal articles are quite atomised. The journal publishing world is one where people publish lots and lots of little journal articles, and they're all fragmented in and they get put on repositories and shared separately from the overall journal issue. I don't think people access and read journal issues now, do they? Sit down, unless you're still subscribing and you get the print issue through. Whereas for books, people consume the whole book, don't they? They get the book, and it's still seen as the whole output. And I think that makes a difference in how we feel about books, which is related to the next point, that actually people generally feel that electronic journal articles are better than print journal articles. No one really ever wants to try and track down a print copy of a journal article now. If you're trying to read it, that would feel very anachronistic. But actually, for books, even though we've come on leaps and bounds in the last few years, we're still at a point where electronic books are not the equivalent of print books, and people prefer print. I think part of that is because journal articles tend to be felt to be just about the text that's in there, but so the text, the accepted manuscripts are felt to be the academic equivalent of the published journal article in many cases. But for books, there is something about having a book, and for it having all of the layout and design and the typesetting and the features and the visual feel of it, which is different from journal articles, and people feel very differently about how their book looks and feels than they do about a journal article, where they probably don't care about how the journal article is laid out. They don't really mind about where it sits in the issue. And I think for those reasons, people do self-archive, people do put their articles on repositories. Do people put their book manuscripts on repositories? Nobody would dare share their book, their untypeset, uncopy edited book, would they, with people? I think people are very resistant to the idea of sharing their book manuscripts with people. Also, people don't, when they publish journal articles, I think people have said to us that they don't really see what publishers do for them beyond just managing the peer review process and doing a bit of copy editing and sticking it in a journal title. The publisher's value add to the whole process is felt to be quite low. Well, not for books. Publishers do loads for books, we're told. From all the layout and the editing and the careful negotiation and the marketing and all the rest of it, there's a lot that goes in that publishers do, which I think people value a lot more than they do for journals. And I think for some of those reasons, there is a long history of 20 years of open access for journal articles, but very short for books. And open access is felt to be necessary for journal articles in a way that I don't think people feel it is for books. So some of that is, real, isn't it? Some of, like we are in a situation where we haven't yet moved to a digital publishing environment. But some of that is just saying, if there's anything that makes books different from journal articles, it's how people feel about them. And that presents a major challenge to moving towards open access. Data is even worse, so I won't even go into that. And practice-based research, I think, is very difficult. People are making artistic works as researchers. They're probably doing it in their spare time. They probably make a living out of it. Very difficult to argue that they should be moving towards open access. And the conversations have not even started on that issue. So there's a lot of ground to be covered there. So bigger picture then. I think in thinking about open access and thinking about how this has all evolved over the last few years, it seems quite obvious to me that open access isn't this massively disruptive force in a system which is otherwise completely stable. There are a lot of changes going on in academic life at the moment. The rise of the impact agenda, constrained public funding, what some might call the increased marketisation of the academy, competition between universities. We're now operating in a global world. The rise of new technologies has started to affect the way that we do research and that we do teaching, and it affects the way that we communicate. Open access is a kind of just a part of that. But open access, I think, challenges the very social contract of research. It's the social contract that researchers have as a result of receiving public money. A learned society, head of a learned society said to me last year that open access was the biggest threat to their discipline. And I completely disagree with that. I think the biggest threat to their discipline is a lack of public money and a lack of funding over the next few years funding which will increasingly be seen to be not worth putting in if research is continuing to be locked up away from the people that actually need it and being published in places that are expensive and inaccessible. So that learner society perspective is wrong, actually, in my view. And open access is a small part of the overall picture. And open access is not sufficient on its own to deliver the kind of changes that we might want to see happening in academic life and to maximise the use of public money. But I would say that it's absolutely essential as a way of ensuring the future survival of university research in the UK. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.